Hi, welcome. Welcome. Witam, Croeso, benvenuti, etc. I'm Israel. Welcome to my talk. I don't usually do talks in front of people, so this is very new to me. I just came back from Poland, and I have a pretty bad cold, so I hope it's all right with you. This talk will be recorded because I was worried that nobody would come, so I would make this a YouTube video. But it turns out I'm not talking to a wall, so I'm very glad about that. So I'm talking about why you're not learning a language efficiently. So if you're in this language society, I assume that you are learning some sort of language. You might have different reasons for doing that. You might be learning for fun, for travel, but you might be struggling with how you're doing it. So maybe you've been doing that for a long time, since school, or maybe since university. It still doesn't feel right, look right to you. You keep translating from your native language to that foreign language, and it's not fluid. Sometimes you try to learn something, and it's just gone in a second. Or maybe you can read or write properly, you can't speak or listen very well. So you just feel like maybe given the time you're spending on it, you could have done better. So this is why I'm doing this talk. And this talk, I'm going to say some very obvious things when you hear it, but things that you might not have been thinking about, because sometimes you just need someone to remind you of something. But if it's not obvious, then that's probably good news. So this will be an interactive talk, as advertised. Which means that in the first half, I'm going to give a speech of some sort. And you're very welcome to ask questions anytime. Just stop me. And I will try to invite you to talk. But I wasn't expecting so many people, so this is exciting. And then I will have, hopefully, some time to take some questions from you about whether you are having problems with language learning, something about specific languages, if I happen to know about those. And you can ask about me if you'd like to. So now that's perfect transition. Who am I? That advertisement on the Instagram might have given a little bit away. But first of all, I'm supposedly, more importantly, a composer. I'm doing a PhD in music composition here. I'm in the second year. When people ask me what I write concert music, and which means I write a score and then people play it. I've also done some opera, and I've scored a documentary film. And my current research is about density in music and urban landscapes. But that's not the part you're interested in. So, oops, sorry. I am a polyglot. I identify as one. How I define it is not by how many languages I speak. I think someone is a polyglot if they enjoy the process of learning a language, if they like doing it. Sometimes they have an addiction, sometimes they don't. I do, definitely. And I've been running, it was a travel blog in the beginning, and then it became a language blog later on, since 2015. And since the pandemic, I started teaching languages online. I started a YouTube channel called Rhapsody in Lingo, where I talk about languages for obvious reasons. In the same year, I started a language/linguistics podcast in Cantonese, called 水影广上 with my friends. Worth noting that I'm a proponent of written Cantonese, and that's a topic for another day. But I think that Cantonese deserves to be written just like any other language. Before this, I've spoken in very weird places. Two universities in Poland for some reason, Oxford University and these polyglot nerd events and conferences. But sadly, those are only online, so this is new. So you might be wondering how many languages I do speak, because that Instagram post says 12. 20 is a number that I'm very reluctant to use. It's a number of languages that I have studied to some extent before. So most of them, I wouldn't say I speak. It just happens so that I took an interest in something, I tried it out, it didn't work out very well for reasons that we'll see very soon. And so that's why I'm happy to say that I speak 9 languages-ish to various levels. Some of them are very comfortable, some of them less so, but these are the languages that I would say I can survive in. I can go to the pub, enjoy a conversation, I'm comfortable with them, and then I'm sort of learning a couple more, which I wouldn't say I speak. This is my first ever video on YouTube. I don't really like it in retrospect, but just a sneak peek. I'm not going to show the whole thing.
大家好，
Oh,
我係 Israel
that's
啊。
very loud.
咁我本身正職咧就
Yeah.
以後就回到了用母語叫做
Sneak
Som
peek.
utbytte student på Lunds universitet。伫真濟漢族語言內底，我上介意學就是閩南語。
It says.
Teraz można powiedzieć, że polski to mój ulubiony język.
Okay, so there's my creds. That's it.
大家好，我係 Israel 啊。
Next. Okay. So I'm not going to go into details here. I'm currently working on mainly Welsh because I really like the language. I speak Polish and German most comfortably, and I want to get them to a professional level where I can read things very comfortably, and so on. Okay, so let's talk about the main topic of this after this extended introduction. Why you're not learning language efficiently or effectively? What do I mean by efficient? Because it doesn't necessarily mean fast. So some people expect to be fluent in 2 years. Some people want to do it in 3 months or 6 months, whatever. But is there really something called fluent? Is there something called finishing learning a language? You can't really finish it. You're always learning. Or do you want to get to a conversational level where you can talk to people happily in a certain number of months? To me personally, efficient language learning is when you put some time into learning it, you get the most out of it. So this talk is all about how you can maximize the use of the time that you do put in the language. So let's say you put in 1 hour per week or per day. How do we get you as fast as possible to your goal while using the same amount of time? So I will have 6 main points here. I'm not timing myself, so we'll see how far we go. So let's get into it. First reason is maybe you don't need to learn this language. And let's face it, we are speaking English in an English-speaking university. You probably don't need to learn a foreign language, or another one if you already learned English. So unless you're learning it for family or for love, it's really hard to really need the language, essentially. And the thing is, we have monkey brains. So if our brain doesn't think that we need the language, we are not going to learn it. That's the problem. Well, evolutionarily speaking, I'm not a biologist, but we do things that we need for our survival. So if you say, I need a language for an exam, that's not very essential to your survival. You can fail it and you'll be happily alive. So you need other ways to convince your monkey brain that you need this language. Even though we're not going to make it a life or death scenario, there are some ways that we can make the language feel like it is essential to our daily life, at least. So for example, you need an environment for the language, because we are in one of the worst environments for foreign language learning. Here in the UK, we use one of the most spoken languages in the world for our day-to-day lives. So we need to create our environments. So for example, you can have a physical environment. Either you move to a foreign country, which I assume is hard to do. You can make your physical surrounding in that language. You can make your room, the signs or whatever you put in your room, you can put everything in your foreign language. You can have a virtual environment. So maybe your phone, your computer's operating language could be changed. You could get your news, your YouTube content or whatever in that language. And it can be a social environment. So maybe you have a social life, either online or in real life, in your foreign language. Next thing is you make it a habit to use the language in your day-to-day life so that you feel like if I don't use this language, my life is going to be affected negatively in some way. And perhaps you have some hobbies that you like to do, cooking for example, that's not mine, but lots of people like it. You can try to do it in your foreign language. For example, find some recipes in the language and try to read them. Or if you really can't find a way, because there are so many ways you can make the language a necessity. If you can't find one, maybe it's not the right language for you. Because if you can't squeeze it into any part of your life, well, maybe you can find another one that is more suitable. So I've got one successful and less successful example of this. Most recently, I've been trying to learn some BSL, British Sign Language, and it's really hard for me because I live in a hearing world with very little connection to people who use sign language. And as a result, I've been doing it really slowly. So I did some classes, and that went relatively well. And then after the classes, I just couldn't fit into my daily life. And especially with the way I work, I like to learn language by listening to things, and obviously you can't listen to sign language. So it hasn't worked out so far. But on the flip side, my Polish is doing quite well because I get lots of news in Polish. I listen to, very ironically, I listen to podcasts about China in Polish. And especially since the war last year in Ukraine, I've been getting news about the war in Polish on YouTube because, geographically, it's the closest part to the war. So that's been going quite well. I've been depending on the language for my day-to-day life. Second one is similar. It's just not spending enough time with it because language learning is a slow process. Like some people may tell you can do it in a couple of months. You're not going to do it. Trust me. And it's you need to be patient with it. And no matter how fast you manage to get it, it's going to take some time. So that's why you do need to put in the hours. So lots of people say, I've been learning French for 5 years. And they mean that they started learning in 2018 or something. And that doesn't work that way because perhaps you did that, you started learning, and then you've been doing classes once per week or once per 2 weeks or something. And that's very little time that you put into French. So when we say you spend enough time with the language, we're saying actual contact hours, like with a professor or something. So, for example, if you're really passionate, you're dedicated, you can spend an hour doing whatever in the language every single day. And that is effective contact hour. And the other part is consistency. Because I have students, as I said, I teach sometimes. I have students whom I teach something, and then the next week it's gone. Because even though I tell them how to do it, I tell them to do it, they just don't spend time revising what they've done, or they don't use any other methods to retain the stuff that they've been taught. And then I just keep repeating the same thing over and over again in the next lesson, which could be a good thing, but it is a bit of a waste of time. So you need to strike while the iron is hot. So you learn something new, and you try to consolidate it. So how do we get more time with the language? Because we're all busy students. You might have heard of this thing called dead time. If you haven't, it's basically the time that you are forced to spend doing nothing. So for example, I live in Worthington. That's a half an hour commute to the university. And it's not every day, thankfully, but that is some time that I could do something with it. So sometimes I could read a book, or personally, I enjoy listening to podcasts. So I just spend all that half an hour listening to something in any of my foreign languages. So that is an extra half an hour with my languages every single time, 1 hour, every single time I go to university or city center. I can combine these. So next thing is I try to just idly practice my languages. So I don't necessarily have to be using it actively. So sometimes my brain just goes, okay, I wonder how you put these two words together. So if you're learning a European language, for example, there might be lots of conjugations or declensions, words that change. So I'm thinking, how do these words go together? So I could practice that in my brain while I'm doing something else. Don't tell my professor. Sometimes I might practice some sounds because in any foreign language, there's going to be foreign sounds to you, I'm sure, or combinations of them. I'll give an example. My main focus now is Welsh. In Northern Welsh, it's got a really weird vowel that's like E. And I sort of can make something similar to it, but it's an effort to put it into a word. So dysgu, credu, and that's why I've been doing a lot just on the bus or doing other things. I just randomly make sounds and scare people off, but that works. Or in languages like Polish, you have like combinations of really like a shit ton of sounds. I need to bleep that out. And so, for example, you have words like, I don't know, wstrząsający, szczypysznie. So you just have to practice it because it's like gym for your tongue. it is a physical ability. So you need to get it into your muscle memory until you can put them together. Sometimes my languages have holes in the vocabulary. So when I learn something new in a language, I start to think, okay, what is it in the other language? How would I say it? Is there a translation, or is there like a similar phrase to express the same thing? Sometimes I actually do translate between my foreign languages, so that I can check, okay, I can do the same amount of things in each language. Third point, maybe you don't know what you're learning. What do I mean? So if you go to a class, for example, you probably know what you're learning, right? Not necessarily. Sometimes when you're doing an activity in a language, you're just doing it for the sake of doing it because you believe that it's going to help. Like either going to class, going to practicing conversation, reading, listening. And that's not focused, because if you don't know what you're getting out of it, you don't know what to focus on while you're listening, for example. So before you engage in something, you need to think, okay, what am I getting out of this? What is the purpose? For example, I have pretty regular conversation classes. For example, I have one later today, where I just talk to my teacher and enjoy the process. Am I just talking to it just for the sake of it? Yes, and that is perfectly valid. If I'm clear that this is what I want to do, I want to enjoy the process of conversing. Or alternatively, maybe I want to focus on talking about a topic. Maybe I want to talk about my trip. Maybe I want to talk about, I don't know, meaning of life or something. So I need to think about what I want before I do it. Sometimes I want to focus on collocations, for example, how words go together. So if I'm reading a passage, I'm going to think about, okay, which words are going together, which words aren't, why is it expressing this way and not the other way that I'm expecting. And sometimes you want to focus on a certain area of vocabulary when you're studying vocabulary, for example, which is the thing that lots of people do. Or you can focus on a skill. So, for example, when I watch Polish things on Netflix, I want to learn how they swear. And it's a really hard thing. It's very complex compared to English. So I'm going to listen to that show, and I'm going to hear them swear at each other. I'm going to think, okay, why is this word used here? Why is not the other word, etc.? Or sometimes I want to practice skimming. I went to a museum the other day in Krakow on Monday, and I read lots of things about the modern art. And I'm thinking, okay, I want to learn about the art, but at the same time, I want to practice skimming, which is like reading something quickly. So I look at the sign, I think about, okay, this is the main point, that's the key word in this passage about this piece of art. And I practice that intently. Next thing. So you're not connecting the dots. So what do I mean by that? So first of all, disclaimer, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I've, as far as I know, how we remember things is by neural pathways, right? So we have neurons firing at each other, and the pathways is where the memories are stored. And so what we need to do when we learn something new is to strengthen those pathways so that they fire at each other more smoothly, more effectively, etc. And that's why when we learn something new, when we learn a new word, new concept, new grammatical point, we're not just learning that thing. We're also connecting that to the things that we already know. How this grammar point affects the words that I know, or how this word connects to other words that I know, etc. So now, finally, I forgot to ask you a question earlier. So I'm going to ask you a question now. When you're reading or listening, what goes through your head? Anyone?
I guess it depends on if you're reading or listening.
Okay, for example.
If it's like, let's say, your podcast, it depends what topic you're listening to, right? So you skim out the information about that certain topic. Let's say, I don't know, if you listen to Joe Rogan, he's talking about grizzly bears all the time, right? You just, like, if that's the thing you're interested in, that's the only thing you take out.
Sure.
Like, you filter out the extra stuff.
Yeah, so you focus on the things that you want to learn about. What if you're listening to, like, a foreign language practice thing? So let's say you're going to a class, and you need to do a listening practice, listen to this thing in French, answer some questions. Or you just listen to, if you're like me, you watch a video in a foreign language, what do you think about?
I just hear the familiar familiar words that I already know, like because I speak Urdu, right?
Yeah.
If I listen to anything in Turkish or Arabic, there's a lot of similar words and conjugations. So when they talk about a certain topic, I can kind of sense what they're talking about, even if I don't know what they're exactly saying.
Very good idea. Anything else? Any other things that goes through your head when you're reading or listening in a foreign language?
I try to find the rhythm, because languages
Okay.
tend to have a kind of inflection when it comes to words, and sometimes by learning the inflection is like learning a song, and that's easier to remember.
Excellent. Yes, I love that response. Yes, so these are all excellent points, because I want to talk about noticing. Because lots of people, when they listen or read foreign languages, they just let the language fly by. Like they sort of, when they hear something, they get the gist of something. Okay, this is vaguely what they're saying. And that's it. They don't go deeper than that. And most of the time when I'm listening or reading to the foreign language, I try to get something out of it. It's called intensive reading or listening. And noticing is how I do it. So noticing can be anything. So including the inflections of a language, the rhythms, the words that you already know, how the words connect, for example. And that is the most efficient way to strengthen those said neuron pathways, because it's relatively passive, but at the same time, your brain is doing very active things. And you're forcing those neurons to fire at each other. For example, grammar. So you can choose any of these to focus on. So you can listen to something and think about, okay, how's the grammar used? So for example, you're learning a language with lots of conjugations. You're thinking, okay, why is this conjugation used here? Because it's this person, because it's this tense, etc. So when I'm listening to foreign language, I keep telling myself, okay, this is why this form of the word is used here. Not just recognize the word and move on. It can be collocation, as I said. Collocation is when different words fit together. And some words don't fit together. Some words do, even in English. Lots of verbs go with specific prepositions. For example, we spend time on something in English. And in certain language, you might spend time doing something. You might spend time in something, by something. And they all differ in different languages. So you need to notice things like that, not just, okay, yeah, you spend time doing something, that's it, I got the idea. Because one day you have to use it as well. Another example is, in English, you fall in love with someone. In Polish, you fall in love, well, you make yourself fall in love in someone. And then in German, it's fall in love into someone. Well, the direct translation would be that. So if you don't notice these things, you're going to accidentally use the wrong one when you speak the foreign language. And the thing I like to do most is notice words that have similar meanings, synonyms or antonyms, that's opposite meanings, or words that are under the same umbrella, the same general topic. So for example, if I want to talk about language learning, there are certain words that are very useful, like these words right here. These are words that you wouldn't use in certain other contexts, such as cooking. So if I want to talk about language learning in French, I'm going to think about, okay, which are the words that are under this umbrella? Which are the words that are useful? Which are words that aren't useful? And so that in my brain, these words are sort of grouped together in like a clump of words. So when I think about one thing, the other words sort of pop up in my brain, because they often show up together in the same passage or speech. Last one is context. I've been talking about context a lot without saying the word. When I say context, there's two kinds. One is the sentence context. So where a word is in a sentence, what kind of sentence would use this word? For example, you might use a word only in the past. I know Turkish does this because if I say I miss you, you always say I missed you, and you never say I miss you, I think. I'm very beginner in Turkish. I think in Hindi, Urdu, you have something similar. Some words only show up, or some grammatical forms only show up in the past tense. That's all I know about it. The next thing is speaking context. So when do you use the word, or when you talk to someone, when you talk in a certain situation, when you're giving a speech, a talk, you might use a certain word that you wouldn't use in your daily life. When you're talking to the president, when you're talking to your friends, your mother, you might use certain words and not use other words. So you need to notice these things when you're listening or reading something. And of course, you can do that when you're speaking, but that is more stressful. You're focusing on how to put the sentences together. You can't focus on certain details of a sentence. So when you're reading or listening, it is much easier to think about these things so that you can get that consolidated in your head. And I think that's the second last one, if I'm not mistaken. You have a middleman. What does it mean? You might notice that sometimes when you're trying to use a foreign language, you're translating from your native language, or English, or whatever, to the foreign language. Because nowadays, when we learn something, especially here, most of the time we're learning through English. But learning a new language is literally rewiring your brain, as I said, with the neural pathways. You need to connect those new wires together. So you can't just use the existing pathways that you have in English. So sometimes, I don't know, if it's German, you could maybe translate directly, but that's an extra layer. Or if you're more unfortunate, you have a language that has a completely different structure. For example, as I said, I've been learning a bit of Turkish. That is a subject-object-verb language. So instead of Israel eats an apple, you have Israel an apple eats. That is easy when it's just 3 words. But when it's a long sentence, or when it's like Israel, the lying on the table apple eats, yeah, it gets messy in my head. So if I keep trying to translate from English, yeah, some of you might identify with this if you learn Japanese or Korean or something, because it's also SOV. If I try to translate, I'm just going to be rearranging things in my head all the time. That's not very efficient, because I have to wait till I have the whole sentence in my head and then sort of move things around. So instead, I try to think about how natives would do that. Like, because of course, if it's a language that exists, it works somehow in some brains. It's just a matter of how you get your brain to feel like those people's brains. So yeah, I speak computer, so I sort of cache the information in my brain. So for example, instead of thinking, okay, Israel eats an apple and then move it around, I think, okay, maybe a native would go, Israel, so imagine Israel's here, an apple, the apple's here, and then he eats it. So sometimes I use gestures to help as well, so that I can feel things through space and imagine a scene in my head, etc. And I force myself to store the information somehow so that I can get it back soon enough, instead of just letting it go, like in an SVO language. And this might be one of the most important points I'm going to say. You need to make the language connect directly to your thoughts and not through another language. The best way to do that is to connect it to your experiences, because experiences, well, as far as I know, again, not a neuroscientist, experiences don't have language. It's just memories, what happened, or not necessarily. They don't necessarily have language. Sometimes they do. So, for example, you might have learned a word or a grammatical point or a sentence, a swear word, in a certain place, in a certain scenario, when you're doing something, when you're talking to a certain person, and that was a cherished memory for you. And through that, the word or whatever is going to stick to your brain because you cherish that memory. So even now, sometimes when I think about a certain word, I remember, okay, I learned it here when I was talking about this, or when I was traveling to this place, I discovered this word, I liked it, I was drinking or something with a certain person. So this is going to make that pathway very strong. Or alternatively, you can connect it to the experience of that word even before you learn the word. For example, if I learn a certain new word, what's a good example? Just miss. I just used miss as example. I miss someone. So maybe I haven't missed anyone in Turkish yet, but I've missed lots of other people before. So when I learned that word, I think, okay, so I could have used that word to talk about this person, that person. Those are experiences that I've had in the past, even before learning the language. and it's going to form a very strong connection. Last point. This is most obvious one, but this is also very important. You need to enjoy learning the language. And because the brain, this is from personal experience, the brain is much better at retaining certain things when you derive joy from it. So if you study something for an exam, you might enjoy exams. I don't know. You might. I do. But I did, at least in the past. But you probably don't enjoy studying for an exam. So that's why it keeps falling apart, because you're not enjoying the process. You think, oh, that's such a bad memory. I just want to forget about the whole week that I spent on this. So you need to find things to enjoy, even if you are studying for an exam, for example. You might enjoy a film, a video, a song, a book that you've enjoyed in the language, you've read, you've seen it. You might have used the language with someone in real life, or online, or with strangers, or with friends. You might enjoy speaking it. Maybe you're like me, you're a bloody nerd. You like being mind-effed by a language. So that could be a thing. Or maybe you just enjoy making little discoveries, because in the entire process of learning a language, you're going to have lots of eureka moments, like how things connect together, maybe how a word connects to your native language, etc., etc. In any language, there's always these little gems to discover. That might be something that gives you joy. Or maybe you just like listening to it. Maybe you like French or German because you like how it sounds. Or maybe you like how it feels when you say a word like sometimes your mouth just enjoys doing certain things. And there it is. So that's the final recommendations regarding how you can put this into practice and not just theory. So first of all, I want to advertise this. There is a weekly meetup in Manchester, in Ancoats, every Thursday at 7 p.m. to 11. It's in a place called Seven Brothers something. It's pub, assuming you're adult. And it used to be in Deansgate, but now it's in Ancoats, which annoys me. And that is a space where you sort of just meet random people. Lots of people come and go. Some people stay here for the entire year, like me. And it's an enjoy process, because you find people that are learning your language, or maybe they are native speakers of that language you're learning. So you can just relax with them. Usually there's like a Spanish table. Sometimes there's French or German. It's different every time. Second one is italki. If you're not aware, italki is on an online marketplace. I'm not sponsored, sadly. It's where you just find a teacher to work with. So the prices can vary a lot depending on what language or what they are doing for you. They can have different styles depending on what you want out of it, or what they are capable of doing. Sometimes it's like a structured class. Sometimes it could be just like mine, conversation lessons, where you just share your experiences or talk to them about a specific thing you did, etc. The third one is Closemaster, which is one of my absolute favorite websites on the internet. Don't know if you had close exercises in school. It's when basically, fill in the blanks. And this is a site that's all about close exercises, where you get a sentence, you put in a word, and you learn the word, hopefully. Why I like it so much is because it always comes with context, because sometimes when we study in a class from a textbook, it tells you this word means this, and then you try to remember that. But again, as I said earlier, you're not connecting with other words in the language. But with Closemaster, you are seeing how it looks in a sentence, how it changes. Sometimes it might be unexpected things. I think last Black Friday or something, I got a good lifetime subscription, so that is a good deal. Again, not sponsored. This one, if you don't know who Richard Simcott is, it's a guy from the UK. He's one of the most famous polyglots in the world, full stop. He has studied like 50 languages. And so since the pandemic, he's been doing weekly live streams on YouTube. So basically, it's what inspired this talk, because he talks about a certain topic in language learning, and then you get to ask him questions in the comments. So that's every Sunday, 5 p.m. UK time. So I recommend you go check out his streams. And last one, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I talk about things like this. And this will hopefully also be part of said channel. Which brings me to the Q&A session. So I don't know how much time I've got. But this is the time where you can ask me questions about what I said, about me, about yourself, anything. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Do you think it's essential to record and then study later new vocabulary?
What do you mean by record?
Well, write it down or say in Anki or something.
I think that's really personal, I have to say. It is a thing that I would recommend if you don't know what you're doing, because it makes sure that it's somewhere you can reference. Even if you don't study it actively, I have a place where I put down all my vocabulary that I've seen before. And sometimes I think, okay, I remember a word that I learned recently. It's like tip of my tongue. It doesn't come up, so I can flip out my book and see, okay, that's the word that I learned last week. And this is what I needed. But at the same time, you don't necessarily have to study like from that book. So if it works for you, then it does. You need to try and error, you know. Some people like doing like flashcards and stuff. I don't enjoy it. I like to sort of absorb words naturally when I see them used in real context. But definitely, yeah, put them down somewhere just for easy access. In a sense, I have an Anki deck, and I don't actually study it. It's just my dictionary. It's my reservoir of words. It's really weird.
So I know that when you're learning a language, it's really important to have to use it in casual conversation, not just classroom talks. But when you're learning a new language, when do you start trying to put yourself out there and actually speak to native speakers, and how do you get the most out of that experience?
Again, that depends on who you're talking to, because sometimes one of the roadblocks that you run into is you feel like you're bothering that person, right? If it's a stranger, or if it's a friend that you're sort of boring their time, so you feel bad about it. So it depends on what situation you're in. So sometimes if you're in a situation where the person is very happily talking to you, then of course you can try things out. If you're shy, then you can. That's what I do as well. I'm not a very outgoing person. I'm quite shy. So sometimes when I go to order something, like just a few days ago in Poland, I think about, okay, I'm going to say this. It's going to work perfectly, and then it goes wrong anyway. But you sort of build your confidence that way, and then eventually some things become natural to you, because sometimes words just go together very well. When you're ordering something, for example, you always use the same words, same sentence structure. So until something's become natural. What else were you asking? I forgot. How do you get the most out of it? Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I think if I'm talking to my friend in the language, I think the most important thing would be to enjoy the process, because again, living in an English-speaking country, that's not a thing that you can take for granted. Speaking a foreign language, so if you get to talk to someone, then you should just enjoy it. But if you're talking to a teacher, for example, then it depends on, as I said, what you want to get out of it. Like if you want to focus on a certain area, or you want to focus on a certain scenario, ordering something, going traveling, or whatever, then it really varies. Yeah?
So, like you mentioned, from personal experience as well, like learning a new language is like a big commitment. Like you have to give it a lot of time and effort to learn it, right? So, considering you speak a lot of different languages, which are vastly different from each other,
Yeah.
how do you manage that? And also, second part, have you ever forgotten like the language completely?
Okay. How do I manage so many different languages? Well, first of all, whether it's a big commitment, I would question that. I don't think it's necessarily a big commitment. It all depends on your goal, right? If you want to be good at a language, of course it's a big commitment. If you want to just enjoy the process, then it doesn't have to be. You can be, that's what we call flirting with the language. You learn a bit of it, you use a bit, you sort of go, oh yeah, I know that word, and that's it. So it really depends. But how do I manage? It's not very well. So yeah, lots of people learn a bunch of similar languages, and that helps them because they have to see the connections between them. Speaking one language reinforces the other one, like French and Spanish and Italian. But at the same time, there's like some other difficulties because when they are similar but not the same, then you get confused between them. So what I've been doing is I intentionally avoid learning similar languages, except for German and Swedish, because I had learned German and then I went to Sweden for my exchange year. But otherwise, I try not to learn similar languages just to avoid that. And that aspect of things have worked out for me. But in terms of retaining them, it's just, as I said, how they connect to my experiences. Because when I'm speaking a language, I'm not thinking sort of rationally what this is doing, right? I'm not thinking this word means this, that's why I need this conjugation, etc. Like when I speak English, it's natural to me because the words just go together on their own-ish. So I learn a language to a point where the things just click and make sense to me. At a certain point, they go together, like words appear together frequently, they make sense to me. And then they won't go away. Sometimes they're sort of at the back of my head, which happens all the time when you speak 9 languages. But eventually, when you're in that context, they sort of come back. It's really weird because sometimes, like when I'm speaking Swedish, for example, Swedish is a language that I learned to a really high level when I was in Sweden, and then I sort of just chucked it aside because I don't have use for Swedish outside of Sweden. But every now and again, and I talk to someone in Swedish. At first, it's a bit. There's some hiccups because some words are just gone. Some really basic words, they're not there. It's like at the back of my head. What the hell is the simple word? But then after a while, sometimes I go, "Oh my God, I didn't know I remembered that word. I thought I'd forgotten it." But because I was in that context, I was talking about that thing. Must have like brought up some memories of how the words go together, and then the word just comes out naturally. So that's what happens if you approach a language in that way. Yeah. So have I forgotten a language completely? Yes. So I haven't forgotten Swedish completely. It's still somewhere there. But I think that's what I heard from other people. If you learn a language to a certain like intermediate level, it's probably at the point where things click. It's a very subjective thing. Once you learn to that level, they never go away. It stays there. Even if you struggle to remember it, you sort of practice a bit, you get in the zone, and it's back. But out of those 20 languages that I claimed, at least like 8 of them I did for fun. Actually, it should be 21 now because my partner has studied 2 languages in university and I helped her with them, so I sort of know a bit of those languages. But they don't matter to me personally as much as the other ones that I really want to learn well. So I get familiar with them and then they're gone. So I rationally know how this language works. Like one of those 2 languages was Latin. Nobody speaks Latin, obviously. So I don't really... I have a reason to learn to speak it well. But at the same time, I remember how Latin works, the cases, so what tenses it has. So in a sense, I don't completely forget it. I lose the connection, like the soul connection to the language. I retain the rational connection to it.
So when you're trying to get from intermediate to advanced, say going from like B2 to C1, in your experience, do you think it's better to just focus on a single language? Because obviously it requires a huge amount of input to go to get over that plateau. So you say with like German and Polish, did you just focus on one language?
Yeah, it depends on how you define focus. I did some focus study, and I think the key is to be very patient, because even if you try to rush it, you can't rush it. It is a long journey. So when I try to get something to a C1 level, my reference point is English, because I did learn English as a second language. I did it in school. I did it quite well, I think. And so I keep thinking, okay, how did I do this? How did I manage to get to this level where I don't have to think about the language anymore? So what I did in school was I got addicted to like tech blogs. That was an age where we read blogs instead of like watching things. So I learned a lot of vocabulary through reading about computers and phones. And so I try to replicate that. So instead of, yes, I do some studies. Sometimes I have like an advanced reading book. I had one in Swedish. Now I have one in Polish. So I read all sorts of different topics and answer questions about them. But at the end of the day, it's just keep that continuous exposure to the language, especially to native material, as if you were using it in your personal life. And then eventually it gets there, but it's like it's never clear cut. It's not like suddenly you do this amount of study and then you're C1. No, it's just you feel gradually more comfortable with it, and the things come out more easily.
And you think you can do that while learning other languages at the same time?
It's about the time you dedicate to it. Yeah. Like, granted, like if you're spending 24 hours in a certain language, it's going to be more effective. But at the same time, it's partially because you're totally immersed in it, but also partially because of the time you invest in it. So it's like half-half. Yeah, if you do something else at the same time, it's going to distract your brain from it a little bit. That's why people have like immersion summer schools and things like that. But I don't think it's a necessity to be completely immersed in that all the time, especially when we're living here anyway. Like, I don't need any of this.
Just one more for me. What's your favorite reference language to learn in? So basically, for example, I am learning Japanese.
Yeah.
But the base language I use to learn Japanese, or the reference language, is English. But I teach Urdu, and I teach Urdu with English. So I have the connection with English, which is almost native. Right, because I have the connection with two languages going through. What's your favorite like reference language to learn from?
That's an interesting question. I would say, just practically speaking, English, because you get the maximum amount of materials from English, which is a sad fact, because sometimes you're better off learning from another language. A good example is actually both Japanese and Turkish. I can tell a little story. I learned Japanese back in the day. I don't really speak it much anymore. I tried to learn it because I wanted to do an experiment. I wanted to see whether being a Cantonese native speaker would make it easier to learn Japanese. And I looked for sort of Chinese-based materials to learn Japanese, which there is an abundance of. And then when I learned a new word in Japanese, I would think, okay, that's how it sounds in Cantonese, and it sounds really similar. And that was very effective. But at the same time, some things like the SOV part of it, it was pretty challenging. That's why I didn't persist with it. And then I started Turkish last year when I made some friends in a polyglot event. And one of my friends is Chinese, and he said, well, if you do learn Turkish, even if you use English materials, think in Chinese, because there's a lot of the structure that's shared. Again, granted, it's SOV, but things like when you describe a person or describe a thing by putting a sentence before the thing, like instead of the apple that is on the table, you say on the table apple. Things like that. It's very similar. And then there's more that is shared between these languages. I don't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, and I found it very effective. So even if I'm learning from English, I think, okay, so this is how that would be in Chinese, and that makes a lot of sense. So if you learn a language and then you happen to know a language that is connected to it somehow, like, I mean, Chinese and Turkish, they're not similar at all in terms of vocabulary or their lineage, but there are some things that are shared. Or maybe you know some other languages that they have some similarities, just a tiny bit. Try to find those connections, because any connections are good connections. So yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask if you have any opinions on the sort of anti-language sentiment in British culture. I feel like it's very, yeah, she gets it, very anti-language. And as learning multiple languages and as someone who has studied multiple languages, I'm assuming you have at least some small cultural knowledge of those languages. Have you been exposed to any cultures that also have a sort of not so keenness to learn a second language?
You're trying to get me to talk an hour about this. This is like, I have so much to say about this. Yeah. I sort of tweet a lot about these things, and they sort of get on my nerves. But if you say in any other cultures, I mean, it's always about the big cultures, right? The big linguistic cultures where you feel like you don't need any of the other ones. It's like in UK and the US, obviously, and in China, because that's more complicated. There's also nationalism, but because you are in a bubble where you don't need any other language to survive at all. And then there are cases in other cultures where you feel like, I need English, so I need to learn that, and then nothing else. Because I learned Taiwanese, and this is a real thing in Taiwan. Currently, the government's pushing a thing called a bilingual country. So by bilingual, so you ask, what is bilingual? Do you mean Taiwanese? No, it's Mandarin and English. But Mandarin is not, well, it was not native to the island. It came from mainland China. So people just feel like, I learned the ones that are useful, and then the ones that are native to me, or the other ones, I just can just chuck it away. So I'm feeling a lot of sentiments against that. So yeah, that is a common thing, because obviously not everyone wants to learn 100 languages. I'm a weird person, I admit that. It's just about what people value in their cultures or personally. And some people, and most people, just want to get things done effectively, and most of the time that's like through a large language. And yeah, that's just reality. And yeah, but I think respect is a big part of it, because sometimes it depends on where people are on like a political spectrum or whatever. People can be quite disrespectful of other languages, dismissive. Again, I keep coming back to like minority languages, because that's the languages that get these sentiments, that get the discrimination and so on. So Welsh or other native languages or indigenous languages of the UK, they get lots of these sentiments because people think that, okay, they're useless, they are right next to the largest language in the world, and then as a result of that, they find those languages silly, and people who want to use those languages are, I don't know, they're nationalists or they're unnecessary, etc. So I think like even if someone doesn't want to learn any other languages, they need the respect for them to exist as their own thing. And it never hurts to have more languages around us. Yeah.
But as a hongkonger, as you know, like majority of us, like apparently we don't really like China that much. But like, what do you think about like when the government is like trying to make teenagers learn more about people who are like, what's your opinion on? Like, it's not related.
I again, you're trying to get me to talk for an hour about this again. That's something I'm very passionate about. No, I think it's just we need self-respect in any language. Like that's like a sort of the opposite of the spectrum from what I just said, right? You need to respect others, but at the same time, when you are in the position of the minority language itself, well, we're not really the minority. We're the majority in Hong Kong. We're just the minority when you compare it to the entirety of China. But you need the self-respect, because for those who don't know, just traditionally, because Cantonese or other non-Mandarin Chinese languages aren't written, we feel inferior, we feel like we need to learn the written language in order to communicate. And sometimes in Hong Kong, lots of parents actually have switched to talking to the kids in Mandarin because it's a more useful language. And yeah, we just need more self-respect. We need to know that our mother tongue is worth it. Like any mother tongue is worth it because languages are beautiful. And then when you want to learn another language, like you want to learn Mandarin, and Mandarin is objectively a useful language to learn, just do it as a second language, and that's completely fine. I've got nothing against it. It's just, it's one thing when the government imposes it on you, and it's a different thing when you yourself give up your language for the bigger language. The first one, I can't do anything about it, obviously. Or we tried, we didn't. The second part, people just need to be more aware of their own worth. Yeah. So if no more questions, then I think that's a conclusion. Thank you. Now I need my coffee.